I'm like, get out, ma'am. The Marine Corps wouldn't put me just out of boot camp into an MOS that's going away. They're like, yeah, it's going away.
Hello, this is Tab Bartley, and you are listening to the Oath We Took podcast, the show that tells the Marine Corps story through the Marines that served. I'm joined today by Travis. He is the reason for this podcast. I know so many amazing Marines who hesitate to tell their stories. Their stories hold so much power and so many life lessons. Oftentimes, though, they go untold. Not every Marine's story is the same. What is the same is the oath that we all took. I am honored to have you on, Travis. Thank you so much for joining me.
Tabitha, it's great to be here. I'm looking forward to Marine Simplify.
Yes. And so the first question I always ask is, why did you decide to join the Marine Corps?
Well, I decided to join the Marine Corps because I was like not really motivating in my life. And I'm like, I want to do something that's challenging. And I joined from an Air Force town. Shreveport Bossier is an Air Force town. And it was right there. I said, no, I won't join the Air Force. I won't do the easy thing. I'll join the Marine Corps. And it was really honestly just a way to reboot my life and see what I could do and get out and get away. So that's what I did.
And that's kind of old to join the Marine Corps. It's not old in life, but it's a big difference in boot camp. So how was it kind of like being older through like the initial, I would say like the junior Marine phase of like boot camp and your MOS school and all of that? How was it being a little older?
You wouldn't think 17 to 21 would be that big of a leap. The 17, 18-year-olds, they could beat them up all day long and they'd come back for more. By the time the weekend got there, man, I am like, I will do anything for any extra rest whatsoever. As far as the drill instructors go, I mean, you were all equally worthless, as the movie said, so you were just thrashed the same way. But I didn't cause like stupid problems, but I still got thrashed. So that's how it went.
And I think because I was a little bit older too when I went, and I feel like emotionally there were things in boot camp that I saw people reacting to that it was like, that's not personal. That's not like, why is this making you upset? That like that little bit of like life experience made at least the mental side of boot camp and that type of stuff a little easier. Did you kind of have the same experience?
Yeah, it's just like, I was playing the Nine Inch Nails song, had like a whole all through boot camp. Like this is just a temporary thing, you know, this is not personal. The only time I kind of almost cracked is we're getting smoked, and I'm in MCRD San Diego, and the drill instructor's like, hey, Partington, recruit, the airport's right over there. It's like a half mile away. I'll give you a head start. I'll give you a head start. You just got to run. You just got to beat me. You want to do it? You really want to do it? And I'm like, I thought about it for a good like second, and I'm like, I can run 3 miles in 21 minutes. He gives me a half mile head start. I'm good. I'm like, just kept going, just kept going.
I almost wish you had because how epic of a story would have been.
Well, it was something else, man.
And so did you pick what MOS you were going to do in the Marine Corps? Was that a factor in your decision?
So I took my ASVAB. I was going to be a reservist, actually,
Okay.
infantry unit. Took the ASVAB, and all of a sudden, the recruiters are like, "Hey, you ever thought about active duty?" Because I got a GT of 121, and the recruiters are like, I was like a unicorn. Like you don't usually get guys like that. They're like, have you ever considered the air wing? I said, well, I like airplanes. I like Barksdale Air Force Base. What's that entail? And I wanted air traffic control really bad. I mean, I knew that was the job to get. I mean, it was just crazy what you could do with that job. And they're like, well, we can't put you in ATC, but we'll put you into aviation support. So there's like navigation and cryogenics and all this other cool stuff. But it's just like ATC. I'm like, well, that sounds like a pretty good deal. Yeah, sure. So I didn't get to pick my job. I got to pick my occupation field, the 7200 aviation support branch.
And you were saying, before we started recording that although you got to pick what you thought you were going for, ended up that they were disbanding it.
So we go through. It wasn't the Crucible at the time; it was MCT. So we go through MCT, and it's the day you get your orders, and you shake the captain's hand, and so he's up there, Bennington 0311, Sergeant 59 Zis, Partington 7222 Hawk Missile Systems Operator. And I'm like, sir, what's a Hawk Missile Systems Operator? He's like, I gotta tell you honestly, Marine, I got no idea. The master sergeant there was like, hey, Fort Bliss is a good duty station. But what's Hawk Master Sergeant? He's like, I really don't know, but I can tell you this. When you get to Fort Bliss, they'll tell you all about it. So I get on the plane, get to Fort Bliss, and check in. There's the Army's E7, the Sergeant First Class at the little duty station. And I'm here to check into the Marine Corps detachment. She's like, yeah, right. So she calls the duty NCO, and the I remember there was two WM women Marine lieutenant who was the duty OIC, and the PFC who was the duty NCO, because it was a small detachment, and they picked me up, and they're like, the first thing they said, Lieutenant Co and PFC Rossi was like, hey, Hawk's going away, right? I'm like, get out, ma'am. The Marine Corps wouldn't put me just out of boot camp into an MOS that's going away. They're like, yeah, it's going away. Get to your schooling and all this other stuff, and the colonel gets up there and says, yeah, I want to tell you, Marines, that LAD, light anti-aircraft defense, is here. It's the Stingers and the Avengers. Hawk is in fact being replaced by Patriot, but we're going to work with you all and make sure your Marine Corps experience and your time here at Fort Bliss is great. Yeah.
So you're going through and you still have to learn about this job and pass this course for a job that's not going to exist past you don't know when.
Correct. We were expected to, pass all the classes, aircraft ID, missile assembly, the loader, the radars, the engagement classes, all that, sleep deprivation drills, all that stuff, and then go into our unit and perform. Yep.
Was there any transition plan of like what you guys would be doing once it was disbanded?
Not really. So fast forward, right? It's 1997, and we're doing a field op where we would take the radars and the missiles out in the field, not not for shoots, but for just the fake ones to train with them. And all of a sudden, Lieutenant shows up with a bunch of paper and passed them out to our platoon, and we all read the Almar saying that Hawk is officially disbanded. If you hadn't gotten promoted to corporal by the time this Almar went into effect, which was this was in February, the Almar went into effect, I think, May. Forget it. And sure enough, May hit, and I had just served enough time to be eligible for corporal. Because the last corporal you got to be for like 18 months, right, before you can even.
I think so, yeah.
Something like that.
18. Yeah, something close to that.
I just hit it, so I'm getting real excited, right? PFT needs a little bit of work, but my rifle score and everything is on point. The cutting score for corporal was 800 points higher than it was for sergeant. Translation: you weren't getting promoted. There were, and so there was this real, to your point, this real like, what's going to happen? Because if you weren't on the cusp for sergeant, what were you going to do? And if you were a lance corporal being a corporal, you were pretty much done. And the thing was, there was the meritorious board for corporal. But the problem was the H&S battery, we were batteries, all the support MOSs, Motor T, S1 through S4, NBC, were like, hey, wait a minute, why are we giving these meritorious slots to these Hawker Marines when I've got my Lance Corporal who's going to be in his job field for their, 4 years? So it really, became a hard, like, let's get motivated to try to do this. And you start slowly packing up your gear, realizing that, hey, we're packing up and we're not going to be able to do this again. So it was just a really weird time, Tabitha.
And did you go in, thinking you would do 4 years and get out, or were you just kind of like, I'll see, or I want to, make this a career? What was your mindset?
I was an all-C guy. I'm like, if I like it, I'll stay in and check it out.
Yeah.
If I don't like it, only got 4 years. What I got to lose? When I saw the missile leave the rail for the first time, where you put together the missile, you assemble it, you put it on the launcher, and then we do the shoot, and they fire the missile at a target. You can't even see the target; it's that far away, and you see that. And this missile right here, this is the Hawk missile. This is why I styled this after of. It's a 1,500-pound bullet with like a 200-pound warhead in it with these big like shotgun shells. And when it leaves the rail, you hear it go boom. That's it breaking the sound barrier.
Jeez.
It is, when I saw that, I am like, I don't care what I got to do. I want to do this the rest of my Marine Corps career, because the cool thing was, it's like, well, you go back and, well, I'm an 0311. I fire a machine gun. I'm this, I'm that. What do you do, Partington? I fire a missile as long as your car at target 40 miles away. And it's awesome. You got any pictures? Yeah, here's my picture. You got your M240 Golf. I've got my Hawk missile. It was awesome, Tabitha. It was absolutely savage. And the fact of the matter was, the air wing didn't like us because we did stuff out in the field. And the grunts didn't like us because we were air wing. Nobody liked us. It was fantastic. It was like, yes, I would do this for 20 years. No doubt. I was in. But then the Almar dropped, and it's like, you got to face reality. Like, this is it. And there's nothing that, there was no like real, the career jammer was there, right? The career planner, but all they were trying to do was make sure you stayed in. And a lot of the people I went to Hawk School with in the class behind us, either were, you had cooks or artillery. And no disparagement against those MOSs. They are vital, right, to the Marine Corps mission. But that's not why I joined. I didn't join to fire a 105 millimeter howitzer. I did want to do like air wing stuff.
Yeah.
And so I got the, well, you don't want to be a Marine bad enough if you don't want to be a cook. No, it's not that. And even that is now, a lot of those MOSs are farmed out to civilians. You see what I'm saying? It was just,
Yeah.
it just seemed like there was just, this part of my life had come to an abrupt end. And so I got out of Terminal Lance, and a lot of people think I was a bad Marine, or not up to it. There was no avenue out. I could get a 300 PFT, shoot expert on the range, do all my MCIs. It didn't matter. You were not going to progress. You couldn't get promoted. And it's unfortunate because I had a lot of good memories doing that job. It was fun. We did a dog and pony show in Miramar, and we're pulling our missiles over the mountains with our 5 tons, and it was awesome. I enjoyed being that kind of Marine.
And
So,
how was that like abrupt transition out of the Marine Corps? Because not saying it left a bad taste in your mouth, but getting that, I feel like, this is something that like I get recruiting, and like, yes, you need to like want to be a Marine, but like the reality is we have to look at life past the Marine Corps, because there will always be life past the Marine Corps, and the Marine Corps will always replace us. And so career planners who take that approach, it doesn't make sense for retention for me, because it just doesn't in my mind. Retention is more than just, oh, you want to be a Marine. It's like, well, no, I'd like to stay in this as long as I can. But if I can't do something that's going to help me when I get out, why would I want to stay in? Right. So how was that like abrupt transition out of the Marine Corps?
man, I was filled with a lot of hate and discontent for a while. I really, first I questioned, did I really kind of screwed up? I really messed up, you know, doing this. If I had joined the Army, done the Air Force, this wouldn't have happened, right? Um, I felt a lot of that, like I had made a real mistake in my life. And then I couldn't understand it, why, the same Marine Corps that will absolutely, write you up and make you fill sandbags for losing an M16 magazine or a poncho liner, um, did this with people's lives. And especially when you look at it and you finally get told, well, the reason you got put in the Hawk was you filled the criteria for that job role at that time. We had the boat space, we put you there. And to your point about retention, this is the problem I have, is like you want people to stay in, you want people to grow and add that expertise, but you're not caring about their actual abilities. We're just names on a paper. And then you sit there and scratch your head as to, like, why isn't this working anymore? The answer seems self-evident, except for those who are actually doing it. I don't know how to answer that question. But it was extremely hard to get around, and I was like, it. I had a real problem with what the Marine Corps had done at the time. I really did, and it wasn't until later in life that I started understanding some of the good things the Marine Corps did for me.
And I think so often, especially in the transition space or the veteran space, that when people say how their experience was and that maybe it was a little negative or it wasn't a good experience at a moment, that people get like really up in arms about that. And it's like, there were all these factors, and saying that this experience or the Marine Corps could have done better doesn't mean that like you don't love the Marine Corps or that there's not value in the Marine Corps of all of these things. Or if you try to correct the Marine Corps, say there's things the Marine Corps can do better, it's not like an end all be all. Is it not like know yourself and seek self-improvement? Like, is that not what we're taught?
Right? Right.
So, and I think the emotional, like, I wasn't prepared for how emotionally overwhelming the transition would be, because I had somewhat of a similar in regards to, like, I felt like the Marine Corps failed me, or like for the first time, it's like the Marine Corps like just didn't live up to what I thought it was going to be. And in my time of need, they were just like, yeah, whatever. How was that transition like emotionally and mentally for you?
Oh man. I've told people this. I'll expound a little bit more on it here. Is I didn't internalize or articulate to people around me at the time how much it was affecting me. Because it's a sudden stop. I try to explain to people, it's not like, you kind of gradually move out and you're going to retire and everybody kind of, no, I literally, once I got my orders, I went to bed on MCAS Yuma, and then, you know, by 9 o'clock the next morning, the understanding was I would be out of there and not to come back. Right. And then when I rode out of the gate, I realized, oh yeah, I can't go back. Like I can't get hungry in 2 hours and come back to Chow Hall and get something to eat. Or if I get an alley, I've got base. I am out. I've got to go home. And then, as I get into civilian life, I realize that, hey, there's not your buddies that you work with all week. They're going to watch football with you, gonna, ride motorcycles with you, do other stuff with you. Your sergeant's not going to sit there and talk about his wife's problems with you and all that stuff. All that stuff is gone. And you're trying to adjust to this new reality. And, you know, people don't appreciate certain things that you do. It was a lot harder than I let on. And I didn't tell people how bad it was affecting me. I just thought I got to suck it up and figure this out. And I wish I had been a little bit more forthcoming with what a brutal change that was.
And were the people around you, did you go back home? Is that what you said? You went back home?
No. I went from Yuma. I rode my motorcycle across the country to Boston and moved in with my new wife at the time, who I hadn't lived with before I got out of the Marine Corps.
Oh,
So
so that
yeah,
adjustment.
yeah, there's a lot of adjustment there. Um, all I'll say about that is, there's a time in the Marine Corps where you had to get your lieutenants, first sergeants, and you know permission to marry, and you couldn't get married unless you were an E5 or above. And wish I'd done that.
Well, and I think too, like moving somewhere that like you really didn't know people either,
No,
right? Like,
it,
and going through that and not knowing people is very, very intense, I'm sure. And so what did you kind of like decide to do at that point, or what was something you did to kind of like continue to move forward?
well, it was just one of those situations where I had to get a job, I had to provide, and I had to do it quickly. So I think that's the other thing, is I didn't take any time to kind of figure out myself. It was like, okay, I've got to, hit these job interviews today. I've got to get ready to take the, MBTA police test today. I've got to remember that, okay, the town is called Worcester, but if you and I look at it, it's called Worcester, right? I call it Peabody, it's Peabody. Just right. I mean, there's little things like that you have to get used to really, really quickly. And I didn't take any time to really do that because it was like, hey, mofo, get up, get to the let's earn. We got to earn. We got to do it now. So it was hard in that regard, but I did get through it, and that's where the Marine Corps' adapt and overcome and stick to itiveness, got me through it. But it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And if I may, this is one of the things where I talked to a couple World War II veterans on my show, and Tabitha, they literally came off the boat, train, or plane, went to their parents' house. The room hadn't been touched. They came in, mom fed them supper, their Sunday clothes were waiting for them. They went to church on Sunday, and then dad had a job for them Monday morning. Dad would tell them, hey, you're going to go work for my buddy, you're going to work for me, or go down to the lumber yard or the shipyard and start work. So they had a place to stay, they had food in their belly, and they had a job. A lot of them did. And so a lot of us, like yourself and myself, don't necessarily have that getting out. And it's a huge difference that a lot of our older veterans don't understand. I think the Vietnam veterans do to a point, but
Yeah.
anything older than that, they really don't, how different it is for us.
I completely agree, because my husband had gotten out so I could stay in, and then I ended up injured, and it was like, we have 3 children. What the heck are we going to do? And mine was a little similar, and it was like 5 days before my ES. It was like, yep, the Marine Corps is not keeping you. Go figure it out. And I think there's parts about it that are so much harder than you think. Like, when you were talking about not having anybody to talk to and just like holding things in, and it's like, well, who do you talk to? And at that time, I don't know what your experience was, but like when I had tried initially to go to veteran organizations, they were not welcoming to me. It was, here's a WM walking through the door, you're a pogue, which like, not, I wasn't pretending to be a badass, but like, you haven't even asked me my name yet, and you have all of these things. And so that was hard too, because I didn't have that welcome in the community, that I felt like in that community I could talk to them and not be a burden, as where with all of my friends and families I felt like a burden because I didn't feel like they understood.
So glass half full, half empty, glass half full, Massachusetts has a veteran services officer in each town that's supposed to help veterans out. My VSO at the time was Master Sergeant, Cole Antonio. Great man, helped me out. You're going to do this, and this, Lance Corporal, go do it. And then report back to me. Fantastic guy. I go to the American Legion because I was told to go there.
Yeah.
I walk in there, and I don't look like them. I'm not in their same age demographic. They don't know who I am. I tell them, hey, this is what I am, who I did in the Marine Corps. And it was made extremely clear to me in the space of about 5 minutes that you can come here, but you're not welcome here. Don't bother coming back. And I didn't, and I still really have. I've come back a couple times, but it's still that same old, dark place where the same 15 guys have been drinking for the last 30 years there, and they're not really interested in anything new or different. And it's hard.
It it is it is really hard. And I will say there are, organizations, and I will say like detachments and posts across the nation, that it is different experiences, but it's very much dependent on who are the veterans who are leading it and what is like that culture that they've created. Yeah, there are, but it almost feels extra hard when they're not, because again, you think that you can go to this place that should be a safe space for all, and it's like, nope, it's not.
There's a couple others because I was Air Wing 1 and then I didn't serve in Combat 2. Then, what are you trying to do here? You don't belong. And I'm like, well, I didn't really get a choice about where I went. And, we were prepared to go into
Right?
war, just like you. There's that too. And then these are real things that people don't like to hear about, but I think have to be talked about. I much respect to our infantry brethren in the Marine Corps who do that. Absolutely. I'll take nothing away from them. But, I didn't have that job. That's not what I was assigned to do. I went where I was told. I don't know what else you want me to do.
And I think that's where, like, on the podcast, I try and say it over and over. And for any veteran event I'm at, that it is not about so much what you did, but it's the fact that you were willing to give your life. That's what it means to be a veteran. It doesn't matter, where the military puts you. At some point, you were willing to sign that dotted line and put your name on it and say, yeah, I'm willing to give my life for this country if I have to, potentially. And that's what being a veteran means, not whether or not you went to combat, not whether or not you are a certain job or MLS. And I feel like sometimes it's hard to get that across to people, harder than I think it should be.
Well,
What?
now let me ask you this, Tabitha. Do you
Yeah.
I- the group of people that surprise me the most though are civilians, because a lot of civilians are like, by the fact that you uprooted your life and went to this strange place and served and came back, and I respect that. It's not so much civilians I get it from, but it's other Marines that will sit there and tell me, hey, your service doesn't mean as much because you didn't serve in combat. And it's not all Marines. Don't,
Yeah.
it's not all Marines, guys, ladies and gentlemen. It's
Yeah.
some,
Yeah.
but it's enough that it's noticeable. And we're not the only ones.
Yeah. And I agree. It was very strange with civilians, and my gender played a role more than I ever thought it was going to,
Really?
because for me, it didn't really. In the Marine Corps, most often my gender was like a positive, because I was public affairs, I was on the recruiting side of the house, and I had amazing leadership. But when I got out, all of a sudden, oh, my gender mattered so much to everybody, every provider I saw, like everything. And I don't know, maybe it's because I moved back to rural America, rural Indiana, but it was just strange. I had some very strange interactions with civilians that I did not expect to have to. um I didn't think it had to validate my service as much as I did to civilians.
Really?
Yeah, it
Huh.
was it was a strange experience. But what did you end up staying on the air wing side when you got out of the Marine Corps? Is that the career path you took, or what career path did you end up
Well,
taking?
I got hurt on a run. This is go back a little bit. I got hurt on a run and my PFT score started going down. They started looking at me, and what had happened was they're like, you know what, we could try to operate on him. We could try this, but his MLS is going away. Sergeant Major's like, this sucks, but I'm doing you a favor. We're going to medically separate you with an honorable discharge. In hindsight, that was actually the right call to make based on everything. When I started learning what was going on with the battalion and them shutting down, for me to stay in and try to go to another unit and then get worked on was just a career ender. So I definitely no ill will there. But when I got out, I'm like, I'd always I was a computer nerd, working on computers, learning DOS, so on and so forth. So I'm like, I'll get a job in the computer industry because it was really hot that time with everything going on. And the thing is they're like, well, you're not technical enough. I'm like, well, what do you mean? I worked on a Raytheon built system right here in Massachusetts. It's look at this thing. Well, we don't have a piece of paper that says you're technical. So I had to go get I got a training course through the Master Sergeant Col Antonio. I got a piece of paper saying that I was technical, yay, and started working in technology. And so, long story short, we could spend a whole hour just on because a submariner is the one who got me into, a professional setting that really benefited me. True story. He was looking for a person to add to his help desk team. He got a hold of my resume. He talked to me. We met over at a Japanese restaurant in Norwood, and he tells me his, military story being a submariner, and I tell him mine, and his boss is like, well, he's never really he's done technical stuff, but not in a financial services setting. He's like, he's gonna be fine. He's gonna be fine. I'll show him the ropes. And he did. And I've been there for over 23 years, and I've moved from help desk support to now uh, cybersecurity, and I
That
do
is,
DevSecOps.
and
And
that I feel like that's so awesome, especially like when you had kind of like, oh, I'll stay in the Marine Corps, potentially, to then finally find a place that you were able to like stay and
right,
like it enough to stay that long. I mean, I think that speaks volumes.
it's just it's a great organization. They support the military. They're very active about that. A lot of the senior leadership have military and their families. So they're like, we're going to make sure our firm is open for veterans. And so I feel really welcomed and valued there. But it was a old crusty naval submariner, Navy guy, of course, Tabitha, the Navy
Me
again.
always. I married a corpsman.
So but this is where I talk about where the esprit de corps between the services really comes into play, and the fact that you serve means something to the right person at the right time.
And it really, really does. And I found, like, after bad experiences with veteran organizations, I found some really good experiences. And it was like a lot of, like, again, mixed, like it was, we were veterans. Now, obviously there's something special about Marines. I won't lie. Like, I love being a member of the Marine Corps League. There's just something about Marines.
Absolutely.
But there is a connection where, like, I work for federal government now, and it's like, you're a veteran? Awesome. And then instantly, you're able to, like, talk about so many things and have so many shared experiences. And I'm interested on how you got started podcasting, because now you have a podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about how you started podcasting your podcast and what you do?
Oh, sure, sure. And by the way, I'm having a great time on yours. So 2010 to 2014-ish, 15-ish were rough years for me personally. Um, that's kind of all I'll say in this forum, but it was a very trying time for me. And one of the things I had done when I had to start a new chapter in my life is I wound up joining the Marine Corps League, which, if you are a Marine veteran, I recommend that you do that. And you know, what we did at the time is, and we still do, is we do the burial rituals for veterans and active duty service members that have passed on, regardless of branch, right? And during that time, as you know, it was like the height of the 22 a day. Like, I don't know about you, but I'm like, people I knew, people I served with, people I didn't know were killing themselves at an alarming rate. And we would get asked to do the ritual at these funerals. And even though I was in a really hopeless state, I tell people, I was in my valley, um, felt really worthless in a lot of levels, and stuff was not working out for me. I still, being a part of the Marine Corps League was something to do and somewhere to be, and, kept me connected, right? We do a ritual one time, and, the family asked us, well, why did you guys hang on to hope and this person did not? I didn't know what to say. But I'm like, Tabitha, I'm like, I didn't know what was going on. I'm like, this is just crazy. I'm going to do something. And around that time, I was doing some guest hosting at WVBF AM 1530 in Taunton, Mass. And I thought, maybe I'll do a military show, because there really wasn't one at the time. This is like 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Podcasting wasn't what it is now. And I'm like, maybe I'll do a show. Maybe I'll try to do something. Well, airtime is $2,000 a month minimum. Like, okay, forget that. And hatched on this idea of doing podcasting. And all I wanted to do was try to tell either my story or stories about awesome, amazing veterans and active duty service members and people who support us who have overcome these amazing challenges. Awesome. Not amazing, but these terrible challenges, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'll do that. Didn't know jack about anything. I'm just going to do it. And so Oscar Mike Radio was born. And Oscar Mike for me was, I wanted to be on the move, on mission for our veterans and active duty service members. And by being on the move, because as you know, in the Marine Corps, movement's life, right? We move to contact, we, locate, close with, right? We destroy the enemy by superior firepower, baby. Let's do it. I'm getting motivated just thinking about that. Oh, sorry.
No apologies needed.
But so we have to be on the move. You've got to be on the move. You can't be stagnant. And I'm thinking, that will force my mind to be on the move. So I hatched the idea in April 26, almost 8 years ago to the day. And then July 22nd, 2016, the first episode dropped. And I'm like, oh my God, we're doing this. And the first 100 sucked. I mean, well, I wouldn't say that. Not all of them sucked, but I'm jealous of all the tools podcasters have now that I had to fight with back then. But I started doing it. And the thing was, even though I was going through some terrible times in my life, the podcast gave me purpose. The podcast made me accountable to be putting out a show every week. I had to get out of my shell and talk to people. I had to understand where people were coming from. And it made me also realize that, man, I don't know anything about anything, Tabitha. Like, there's so much about the world in the military, even the Marine Corps, that I just don't
Yep.
know ever. But I like the quest for knowledge and understanding. And I like when I'm talking with somebody and they start opening up and people are like, wow, man, I learned something from that dude. Or, that woman is amazing. How can I be like her? And that gave me fuel for my spirit to face other challenges. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like other opportunities to write and to do MC work and voiceover work and other things opened up. And it's just changed my life. You know, just being able to talk with you in this forum right now is an example of what we've been able to do. So that's how it got going. And there's a whole lot we can talk about over 8 years, but that's it in a nutshell.
And what keeps you continuing to do it for 8 years?
I just I'm trying to improve all the time, right? I want to work on the craft of being able to talk to somebody and understand where they're coming from. The technology's changing, but also it's when somebody says to me, "Hey, that show really, resonated with me," or the best is when a family member, a wife, a mother, a father, husband, brother, whatever says, "You know what? I learned something about my relative that I didn't learn before I listened to your show." That's the ignition for my engine. Absolutely.
That brought chills. Like that made me chill because that was something that like when I had started the podcast that it was like even if nobody listens to it now, there's now this digital recording when these Marines when they're kids, when they're grandkids, like I don't remember my grandfather. He didn't talk about his service until I was his guardian on the honor flight. Literally, I just knew that he had served in the army and that he would trade his cigarette ration for what he needed to fix the truck that he utilized. That's all I knew about it. And it was obviously later in life when he started to share his story, but that was like part of like me like wanting to start a podcast because I feel like with each other we're able to be a little more vulnerable. I feel like we're able to share our stories. And I don't know if you've had this issue, but I often meet service members who don't think their stories matter.
I have an opinion about that if you want to hear it, but I do.
Yeah.
So this is no disparagement. This is no hate, but there's been this real super focus thing on special forces people and infantry. And to me, those individuals earn that and they deserve it. But what people forget is there is, for every one of those individuals, there's like 10 of them behind them, making sure they have ammo, making sure the plane works, making sure the helicopter can take off, making sure their medicine is there. I could go on. And while we might not be on the firing line, if we don't do our job for you, who's on the firing line, you can't complete your mission. So when there's so much focus on that aspect of service, and it's a valuable access, I am not diminishing that at all. You automatically feel like your story doesn't mean anything because you weren't, carrying the 240 and then placing it and doing all that stuff. But I try to tell people like, look, you did a high pressure job with a lot of times less than what you had to do that job with and delivered at a high level. And there are lessons we can learn from you. We can't learn them if you don't share them. And as we found out with our World War One and Korea veterans, once they started dying off, we're losing all all those contexts. I wish we had talked to our World War One veterans more because that was the war that's supposed to end all wars. We missed a whole lot. And so you have a story. Your service was valuable. Please, please consider telling it.
I completely agree. And I think too, there's so many things, and especially like now there's, stories that they were kept secret or we weren't told about. But, I always think of like the Navajo code talkers. Like when I was in, they were starting to get recognition. And I heard it because, again, I was in the public affairs realm. I heard the stories. But there are so many entities like that. Like we literally would not have won the war without them. There's there's so many stories. And what would you tell somebody who maybe feels like how would you make somebody comfortable in telling their story? And how have you gotten comfortable telling your story? Because again, it's not like your story was all sunshine and rainbows and the Marine Corps was perfect and great the whole time.
So two things, first of all, when I'm talking to somebody, it's not as much as possible. I try not to interject myself into their story. I try to, get it out of their story. And the first thing I'll tell you is, hey, it's just you and me in the Humvee or the 5-ton. We're going back to main side to get chow and haul it back to the field, or you're with me on a porta potty run. Oh, those were great. We're in the desert. The porta potties are all full. We got to go empty them, or we're on a water bowl run. I'll tell somebody, hey, we literally would go up with the water bowl, 400-gallon tank on wheels, and take like 20 minutes to fill it up. And they would do it from the canal, so on and so forth. And the gunny would give me his fishing pole, and we're just two dudes or a dude and dudette in the 5-ton. I'm driving, and we're just talking. And for whatever reason, Tabitha, that's like, okay, cool. We're just in the 5-ton back in the day talking about whatever. Because I don't know about you, but it's those Humvee rides and those 5-ton rides where your staff NCO and your little Lance Corporal PFC will kind of talk to you in a way that they won't when you're in formation, right? And people understand that in our culture, and they just start talking to me.
The smoke pit. I always bring it back to the smoke pit. You
Yeah.
never knew who was come to the smoke pit. Not everybody's smoking at the smoke pit either, but like that's where like you were able to talk about anything and everything, right? And just word vomit.
I wish I'd learned that lesson. I wish I'd learned to have a pack of Marlboros, because the guys who freaking, stashed the gunny in the first sergeant with smokes were always like in an easier working party than us.
So we learned in public affairs to always carry like one of our Marines, he carried I don't know, carried some very obscure cigarette brand that everybody was like, oh yeah, what the heck is this? Or I think he rolled his own, but he didn't smoke, which made it funnier. But it's definitely like that environment. What is something like if you had to tell people one thing about your story, something you would want people to take from your story or your experience, what would that be?
Marine Corps changed my life for the better. All warts and bad stuff aside, I wouldn't have gotten through the hard. And it's really funny. I went through a very different part of my life, but it's like 10, 15 years later, when I'm going through some real challenges personally, professionally, physically, that adapt and overcome mindset, that locate and close with mindset, more than anything else, more than any degree, certificate, training program, just being able to, because I got smoked at, and that DI is like, hey, the airport's just over there. Go get it. All that was what got me through the hard times. And then the other thing I would say is the by and large, the esprit de corps is for real. You know, I don't know you from Adam, right? Because you and I both served. You're a sister now. Whether you got a brother, whether you like it or not, I'm one of yours and you're one of mine. And the and also, we know our own birthday. The Air Force doesn't know when their own birthday is, Tabitha.
No, they don't.
So it's that part of my life that, one, no one can take away from me. I earned that title, and because I did it, I'm different than you are, and that's a good thing. So for all the challenges, there have been times in my life where my Marine Corps time has paid thousands times more dividends.
That is brought chills to me. Before I ask the last question, was there
Okay.
anything that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure we talk about, or anything you didn't bring up that you
Yeah,
would like to?
I got to talk about WMs for a second. It's really strange, okay? WMs, women Marines. Like, on one hand, it's like, I'm having this corporal chew me out about something that she feels that I needed to do better. And then, you know, on Liberty, she's like, I want to talk to you about problems with my boyfriend. Or do you think, you know, I don't wear dresses that much. So what do you think of my dress? And I'm like, we go from freaking war paint in an M249 saw to like, how do you flip the switch from being like a feminine to like savage Marine like that, Tabitha? It's always been a mystery to me.
I don't have a question. I don't have an answer for that per se. But I think that like, and you know, the Marine Corps is completely integrated now, but like when I went through, our boot camp was still separate, and there was just female drill instructors are scarier than male drill instructors. I don't care what anybody tells me.
Really?
They are we would take educators to the workshop, and every year they were intimidated by the female drill instructors. So I think that I think females can just be we can be warriors too.
All right. All right. Okay. Fair enough.
So the last question I always ask is, if you had to take the oath again, would you?
I would. I would take the oath again, absolutely. But what I would do is spend a little bit more time understanding the recruiting process, for sure. But taking the oath, you know, I remember it's MEPS in Bossier City, Louisiana. I remember the day, and it was a proud day in my life. I was stepping up to do something more than others. I wasn't Nathaniel Hale, right? Where, you know, I've got one life. I regret that edit that out. I regret that I have but one life to give for my country. I wasn't Nathaniel Hale, but I was definitely like, understood where he was coming from.
Thank you so much for everything that you do with your podcast, for your service, and for willing to share your story. This is the Oath We Took podcast, and you just heard a piece of Travis's story. You now know one more Marine and one more piece of Marine Corps history. His sacrifices matter. His stories matter. Not every Marine story is the same. We didn't all join the Marine Corps for the same reason. What is the same is the oath we all took. An oath that easily could have ended in death, and for some, it did. So listeners, instead of asking you to thank a Marine for their service, I am going to challenge you to continue to listen to their stories instead.